Today we're diving into a juicy question that's been on my mind for years. What is the absolute best way to cook a steak to achieve that perfect mouth-watering medium rare? Is it the good old regular method, the precision-focused reverse sear, or the fast and furious JKF or just keep flipping method? We're gonna find out in this video, so let's get smoking. Welcome to the Smoke Lab. My name is Steve Gao, and on this show I do crazy barbecue experiments you would never do at home so you can learn from my trial and error. I've been cooking steaks for years, and like many of you, I started with what I like to call the traditional method. Back in the day, I'd just toss the steak on the grill, cook one side for 5 minutes, flip it, and then cook the other side for 5 minutes, and really I'd just hope for the best. In most cases, it was overcooked and had a thick gradient band of overcooked meat on the outside of the steak with a little bullseye of medium rare in the middle, which wasn't really that good. Then I got a good thermometer and I started using the reverse sear method, which was popularized by J. Kenji Lopez Alt. With reverse searing, you cook the steak low and slow for an hour or two, typically in an oven or smoker, until it's just shy of your target temperature. In my case, I aim for about 135 degrees, which is medium rare. And then you finish it off with a blazing hot sear. The result is a perfect medium rare steak from edge to edge with a beautiful crust. But life isn't always perfect, and I don't always have an hour or two to reverse sear a steak, so I started using the JKF or just keep flipping method, which was popularized by cooks like Heston Blumenthal, J. Kenji Lopez Alt, and Jess Pryles. This method involves flipping the steak every 15 to 30 seconds, which cooks it faster and more evenly, and gives you something closer to edge-to-edge doneness without the longer wait that you'd have from the reverse sear method. The science behind the JKF method involves heat distribution. Frequent flipping prevents one side from absorbing too much direct heat, which reduces the chance of overcooking. It also ensures that the internal temperature rises steadily and more uniformly, because it's almost like you're cooking the steak on a rotisserie with the amount of times and frequency that you're flipping the steak. But which method is best? Maybe the JKF method can give us that perfect edge-to-edge medium rare in a fraction of the time that it takes to reverse sear a steak. Let's find out. To keep things fair, I'm starting with a beautiful ribeye roast and slicing it into 1.5-inch thick steaks, which is the thickness that I like for steaks. If you've never bought a full roast before, it's a great way to save money because you can cut the steaks in any thickness that you want. You don't have to be locked into whatever the butcher is going to give you. And you can also save some money because usually buying a full roast is cheaper than buying individual cut steaks. The steaks I cut have some decent marbling, not great, but they're okay, so I'm feeling good about this experiment. Marbling, by the way, refers to that intramuscular fat in the steak that melts during the cook and provides a ton of flavor. Ribeyes are particularly prized for their marbling, making them the perfect candidate for this test. First, I'm seasoning them with a generous layer of kosher salt, followed by my Smoke Trails barbecue brisket rub. This rub is really heavy on pepper, which I love for building that flavorful crust on steak. But if you're making this at home, feel free to experiment with whatever seasoning you want. Just make sure it has a good salt base. Starting with the reverse sear method, after inserting a remote probe thermometer into the center of this steak, I placed it in a 225-degree oven, so really low, and I'm cooking it for around 1.5 hours. After 1.5 hours, the internal temperature hits 135 degrees Fahrenheit, so I'm pulling it out, I'm resting it on the counter for 15 minutes. Resting helps redistribute the moisture in the steak, and most importantly with this method, you need to drop the temperature so you don't overcook it when you go on to sear it. Moving out to my backyard, my Oklahoma Joe's Marshall Centerbox smoker is ready to go, and I'm setting it up for direct heat grilling. I start by lighting a chimney full of charcoal, and I'm adding some butcher paper and fire starter for good measure, lighting it with my Oklahoma Joe's charcoal lighter, and then once the coals are glowing, I dump them onto the rack, and I add some unlit charcoal and replace the grates, and let that preheat for 15 minutes. Really important when you're cooking steak to let the grill grates preheat so you can get a really good sear. Time to sear the regular steak and the JKF steak. So the regular steak is going on the grill on the left side, and I'm not going to flip it for 6 minutes. But the JKF steak on the right, I'll be flipping it every 15 seconds, so quite a bit of flipping. And every time I flip it, I'm kind of moving it to different spots on the grill. I don't want to leave it on the hottest part of the grill right over the coals in the middle because it's gonna overcook and burn and cook unevenly. So I put it in the middle to get a good sear, and then after I flip it again, I put it on the edges of the coal. I'll rotate the spinalis, which is the muscle that is on the outside of the ribeye and is considered the most tender part of the steak. I'll rotate that to the outside, the cold side, so it doesn't overcook. And I'll just keep on doing that, flipping it, moving it around the grill to help it cook more evenly. After a few minutes, I also moved the regular steak off the coals in the middle, off the hot part of the coals, so it didn't get really burnt. And I periodically moved it around the grill without flipping it, just so it cooked a little bit more evenly. I'm definitely not a steak expert, but I still use some of my common sense and judgment when cooking a steak. I don't just throw the steak on the hottest part of the grill and just leave it there. I'll temp it with my instant read thermometer, and if the edges of the steak, like the spinalis, which is what I want to protect, gets to a high temperature, maybe I'll want to move that to the colder side of the grill and leave the thicker part of the steak over the hot part of the grill. And I'll just kind of use my judgment, keep on temping, and try to get it to cook as evenly as possible. After 6 minutes, I'm flipping the traditional steak and letting it cook on the other side for 6 minutes while I just keep flipping the JKF steak. Around 11 minutes in, the JKF steak is 130 in the center, which is what I'm aiming for. So I remove it, and 1 minute later, the traditional steak also hits 130, so I took it off the grill. Now it's time to sear the reverse sear steak. This is a lot faster, so I left it until last. All I do is I sear it on one side for around a minute, flip it, sear it on the other side for a minute, and then I flip it again, sear it for 30 seconds just to get that crosshatch grill marks, and then I flip it for a final sear of 30 seconds to do the other side. It has a decent sear, not as good as the other steaks, but the sear is still there. Now for the moment of truth, I've lined up all three steaks side by side, traditional on the left, JKF in the middle, and the reverse sear on the right. Cutting into the traditional steak, I immediately notice there's a gradient. There's overcooked edges, then a band of kind of medium in the middle, and then there's a bullseye of medium rare right in the center. It's not terrible, but the spinalis was way overcooked, and for me, that's a deal breaker. The JKF steak shows a little bit less of a gradient with more consistent medium rare texture overall. That said, the spinalis is still slightly overcooked. Even with frequent flipping, it's really tough to avoid overcooking that thinner part of the steak on the edge. Taking a look at the reverse sear steak, I think this is the clear winner. It's perfectly medium rare from edge to edge. The crust isn't as dramatic, but the tenderness and even cooking make up for it in my opinion. This steak kind of screams, I know what I'm doing. Even though I might not know what I'm doing with cooking a steak, this method allows me to look like I know what I'm doing, so that's why I really like the reverse sear method, and I think that it turned out the best in this experiment. So why does the reverse sear method work so well? Well, let's get nerdy for a second. Let's say this is a cross-section of a steak on the grill. These are my bad representation of grill grates here. Each successive band of meat heats the next one. So let's say it's around 400 degrees here. This is gonna bring this outer band up to 145 really quickly, and that band is going to bring this one to, let's say, 138, and then we're going to get 135 eventually in the very middle. But by the time we probe this and our thermometer says 135 and we remove it from the grill, well, this outer area is already overcooked. It's already medium or well done. And then we get this temperature gradient all the way to the middle. And this is going to be even worse with carryover cooking because the middle is going to pull heat from the outer gradient bands, and it might get as high as 140 in the middle by the time we rest it. But let's erase all of this. Let's erase these gradient bands here. And let's say all of a sudden we put this in an oven or a nice gentle convective heat smoker like an offset, and we're cooking at 225. Well, all of a sudden the temperature is a lot lower, and maybe this outer gradient band is only 138 degrees, which brings the middle gradient band to 136, so it's gently cooking it. That heat is diffusing into the center really slowly over time. We get to 135, which is perfect medium rare right in the middle, and then our thermometer tells us it's 135. We pull it out of the oven. There's very little carryover cooking because the outer gradient bands are at a pretty low temperature, and they're all going to cool down quite quickly and get to a nice 135 degrees. And then we have perfect medium rare all the way from the middle to the outer edges. Now, if you're really experienced at cooking steak, maybe you'll give it a quick sear on the hottest part of the grill, and then you'll move it to a colder side of the grill to gradually come up in temperature. Wait until the center is maybe 125 degrees, take it off and let carryover cooking finish it. But that's really hard and unpredictable, and if we're not cooking steaks constantly, it can be tough to master that method. So that's where the reverse sear method really shines, because with the reverse sear method, it's much easier to pull off for beginners, and it's way more predictable. Another benefit of the reverse sear method that I really like is it makes cooking a lot of steaks really easy. Let's say I'm cooking 6 steaks. Now, that would take a lot of effort and skill on my part if I'm temping all of them on the grill as they cook super fast and trying to get them to cook perfectly, anticipate carryover cooking, do all that kind of stuff. But with the reverse sear method, I just chuck all 6 steaks in the smoker or in the oven, bring them up to 135, let them rest down for 15 minutes, sear all of them, not worrying at all about overcooking them, and then they're all done and they're all perfectly medium rare. So let's talk about conclusions. For me, based on the results in this video, the reverse sear method is still king for me, and I will continue to use it. The JKF method is useful, and I think if you don't have time to do a reverse sear, it's probably the next best option. And as for the traditional method where you cook for 5 minutes, flip it, cook it for another 5 minutes, let's just say that's not going to be making a comeback in my kitchen anytime soon. Got any ideas for future Smoke Lab videos? Let me know in the comments section below, and until next time, happy smoking.